there any, there is, as of right now, there are no members of the uh, community out there, so we don't have that. Do we have a comment? So we don't have any public comments. Do we have any commission?
Can we just remind the public how to join online?
Let's do that.
Okay.
Members of the public are encouraged to join our meetings via Zoom Gov, a secure service that connects you live with no lag time. This meeting is also streamed live on youtube.com/City of Monterey and Comcast Channel 25. If you'd like to provide public comment, please join the meeting using Zoom or by telephone, making sure to join in time to accommodate delays. To join the Zoom meeting from a computer or phone, use the link or phone numbers on the agenda posted at isearchmonterey.org. To join by telephone, dial 833-568-8864, then enter the webinar ID. Today's webinar ID is 161-739-7120. If prompted for a participant ID, press pound. Detailed instructions for using Zoom are available at monterey.org/public meetings. To provide public comment via Zoom, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen. To provide comments by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand, then *6 to unmute when called upon. Public commenters will be announced using their last 3 phone number digits or the name typed into Zoom. Public commenters will be muted until it is their turn to speak. Please turn off TV or computer speakers or go to another room while connected, as background noise interferes with the broadcast. Public speakers will be called upon in order of hands raised. There is a 3-minute time limit for today's meeting. Please stay within that limit. I currently see no attendees online.
Thank you for reminding everybody. So here we are at the, just a minute here. We have my notes at our consent agenda. And I think usually the minutes are part of the consent agenda. So I see no one in the audience, and so far we don't have anyone online.
Correct. There are no attendees
No
online.
attendees online. So we'll go ahead with the minutes. Did everybody get a chance to look at the minutes? And do you have any additions or corrections?
I do on packet page 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th line, Commissioner Dawson questioned that the consequences are for the properties that have not completed the majority of the maintenance plan. I think that he did say at some point that there is currently no penalty for not completing maintenance items short of cancellation of the Mills Act contract. So I'd like to add that in after that paragraph. And then there's one other thing on the next page, packet page 7, 5, 6, the 6th paragraph down. Let's see. Commissioner Dawson suggested requiring an exterior walk around. I don't think that I suggested requiring an exterior walk around. I suggested that property owners should have the option of offering a public tour for only the exterior if they weren't comfortable having people look at the interior of their home.
Okay, I've made those notes.
I didn't notice if, I didn't find where it was stated here, but along that same subject, I did hear maybe Fernanda say at the meeting that usually the features of a historic home that deem it historic are on the outside. And it would be very rare for something on the inside. In fact, we can't even think of anything offhand that we remember that if that would be a critical factor for deeming a home or a building historic. So that's one of the reasons why the tours on the inside are not mandated or required, because that isn't a determining issue. And so is there a way to, you stated that, didn't you?
I did. Yeah.
I think it might be nice to have that in the minutes. I did have a community member wonder about that.
Okay. That we can include that.
It clarifies it for people. It's not just an arbitrary thing. It gives people some solid ground Because if their property wasn't noted for some amazing historic feature on the inside that caused it to be deemed historic for that, there's no real reason.
Mhm.
It's all about the outside.
Okay,
thank-
thanks.
Thank you. Any other corrections or additions to the minutes? Do we have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kathy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Oh, unanimously, we've approved the minutes. So that's, that's-
roll call vote.
Do we have to do the roll call or?
and, well, do we want to?
Yes, we still have
minutes?
to. Yes, for any vote,
Okay,
it's a roll call vote.
okay, it's a roll call. So we're gonna, sorry, I moved back into,
Sure.
we're
Chair
gonna,
S-
we're gonna take a roll call of each member of the commission for the record.
Chair Smith Carvello,
Aye.
Vice Chair Collins,
Aye.
Commissioner Dawson,
Aye.
Commissioner Humbero,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Aye.
Commissioner Rath. Aye. And Commissioner Rodriguez.
Aye.
Okay, those minutes have been approved as amended.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, the next item then, we've already talked about how members of the public can participate via Zoom. And we're moving on to public comments for items not on the agenda. And just for the record, we don't have any public present. Are there any public online?
There are still no attendees online.
Okay. So we will move on to the next item. And that's our first item on the agenda. So it looks like that would be number 3. Receive a report on certified local government 2021-22 annual report. It's not a project under CEQA for Article 20, Section 15-378, and under General Rule Article 5, Section 15-061. So will staff help us out here? Thanks.
Every year, because we are a certified local government, under the Office of Historic Preservation, we are required to submit an annual report of the activities that our Historic Preservation Commission has done, in the reporting year. The reporting period is from October 1st, 2020.
Oh, Fernanda, we can, I don't know about Lori, but I can barely hear you. I don't know if you can speak a little bit closer to in the mic, maybe?
Is this better?
Oh, that's way better. Thank you.
Okay, so we are required to file a certified local government report every year. And the reporting period is from October 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2022. The purpose of the CLG report is to notify the Office of Historic Preservation of the HPC's activities for the reporting year, including designation of historic properties, review of alterations to historic properties for consistency with the Secretary standards, and important surveys of historic properties, and trainings and attendance for each member. And so this is the form that I prepared for this reporting year. It's a template, so it's usually I just answer the questions in the template. So the first one is, are you considering amending the historic preservation ordinance? We are not considering that at this point, so the answer is no. We provide a link to our historic ordinance. This section shows the newly designated historic properties in the reporting year. And for this past reporting year, it's only 580 Calle Principal was designated. And it also received the Mills Act contract. no properties have been de-designated. So that means we have not taken away any of the historic zoning for any property. This just says, yes, we do have a historic preservation element in our general plan. So this is this question asks about design review of historic or potentially historic properties. And some projects are reviewed at the staff level for compliance with the secretary standards, and some require full commission review. So this just explains when does it require staff versus commission review. The HPC makes recommendations on compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act when it evaluates historic alterations to historic properties. So this answer is yes, the commission does provide input. This is the same, similar question, but for the national, the section 106 review, which it doesn't apply usually because our review is a local review that doesn't require federal environmental review. And this is our list of commissioners and date appointed. I updated all the date that your term ends, and you're all going to serve at least until June 30th, 2024, and some of you till June 30th, 2025. We have at least 2 qualified professionals on our commission. We actually have 3, and I've included your qualifications as an attachment. So for this reporting year, both Kim Cole, Community Development Director, and I have served as the staff for your commission. I've served in the latter part of the reporting year. It's been me who has served the most. This is your attendance record. And this is the training that I've gathered from, you've either emailed me about what trainings you've completed, or you've handed me a certificate in person. So I've tried to record as much of it as I've received. And if I'm missing anything, you can let me know at this meeting, or you can talk to me after the meeting. So this is, the question here is, have we prepared any historic context statements in the reporting year? We have not. So for the survey, this was a request by Geraldine to add the Mills Act inspections to the list of accomplishments. And so I've added it here that staff has inspected all Mills Act contract properties, which we surveyed 60 of them. And this just shows that we have public participation at almost every hearing. The only property that, again, was designated in the reporting year was 580 Calle Principal, and it was given the landmark overlay zoning. And it also received the Mills Act contract. So we have a total of 60 Mills Act contract properties so far. We have not had a program for rehabilitating historic properties. that we did have that in the early 2000s, but not recently. And this just talks about, do we have a historic preservation regulatory law or ordinance, which we do. We have our historic ordinance. And it has provisions on how to evaluate changes to historic or potentially historic properties. There were 6 properties that were evaluated for conformance with the secretary standards. And I listed them here. So for some of these, this one was the I forget the historic name of it, but it's the building at Fremont and Camino El Estero, which with the blue tile
Yeah,
Japanese roof.
Mary.
Yeah, you reviewed that. 498 Alvarado Street, they installed signage on that building that's the building that now we're working with a historian to repair the adobe wall that was damaged. 761 Jefferson, you extended this historic permit for this is a Millsack property, and they had some maintenance activities for their property. And 603, 605 Hoffman was the property that was not in compliance with their maintenance program that they have until next month to come to compliance. We have not acquired, we do not have a program to acquire historic properties, so this was a no answer. This asked about who attended the camp training in the fall. So I don't know why they just asked about the fall, because I know that some of us attended the one in April from San Jose, but I do reflect that in the training though.
Mhm.
And then I've attached our resumes and statements of qualifications and all of our minutes from the reporting year. So with that, I would like to let you all ask any questions, or if you have trainings that you'd like me to add, you can tell me now or talk to me afterward. Does anyone have?
So does anybody have any
go
additional information or a question about the report?
Yeah, I did take the ethics training and I forgot to tell you about it.
Okay.
You put that on.
And
Thank you.
and Fernanda was kind enough to remember I did it and added it. Thank you.
In that case,
Yeah,
yeah,
You can look at the training list so that you can
Yeah.
see what I've
I just-
included.
Oh, I see what you did now. Yes. okay.
So yeah,
So there has been some updating since we received our packets. That's what I think
A-
Kathy's
yes,
saying.
a little bit.
A few.
Yeah, I added
I
Kathy's
scanned through more.
ethics training and Carol O'Neill's training that she emailed
Good.
me.
Could you refresh my memory when the camp training was? I did it, but I
Oh, That's-
thought it was at the end.
12, December 2nd?
so there was
So-
one
Yeah.
it was called Camp Sacramento, put on by Sacramento in fall of 2021. And the one that I emailed you all about was in April from City of San Jose.
Okay, I did that one.
Okay.
Was really good.
I thought it was really
Yeah.
pertinent to our
Yeah,
work.
and I don't know how many, it was a lot of hours.
It was it was a pretty long one.
Yeah.
And we went through several projects and talked about criteria, some more pertinent than others, but it
Right.
was mostly pretty meaty, solid training. Any other?
Yes.
Yes,
You have no training for me and I sent you a list, but I can resend it to you.
Okay,
Several
yeah,
things.
okay, please.
On the
Thank you.
page I have has, I see, I'm seeing Lori has, okay, Linda, yeah, you're right. There's nothing there.
And I had sent mine
Mhm.
and it got lost in.
Gee, what Peter Hiller did.
So
and Joe
do
Miller.
they have time to add training that
Yes.
they can?
Yes,
locate it?
this report is due March 31st. So you have
So
until
there's at
then.
least a month. If
Yeah.
you want to check back with Fernanda, she
Mhm.
can add the trainings that
Great.
you might have missed. Are you able to hear that, Linda and Juan? Yeah, good.
And Fernanda, did you want that emailed to you?
It doesn't
I'll
matter.
take the
You can
list back.
email it or drop it off or call me, and either way.
Okay.
Hey, Fernanda, because it's recorded, I'll send you the training, but I did complete the ethics about 3 weeks ago, but I'll email it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it has to be through September, not.
And this,
weeks.
and this is, the actual year is October through the end of September. It's kind of a fiscal.
Then, never
Yeah.
mind. Yeah,
So,
So if you've taken training, later in the fall, last fall, October, December, and this year,
Right.
remember it for next year's.
Yeah.
mhm.
Keep a list.
It's all good.
Yeah,
but,
I've started it.
And, and, and so if you, and if you missed it this last year, work on it next year, I guess, and try to keep up so there's something that you can put on the form.
Chairperson, may I say something real quick?
Of course,
Looking through everybody's resumes, I just have to say, everybody's very impressive, commissioners and staff, and truly, it's an honor working with you. Looking at your backgrounds was very interesting, and it's great that we all have that collective um, experience and knowledge. So, it was pretty cool to see. That's
Thank-
it.
and I like the fact there's some diversity that we have engineering as well as history. And we have a lot of participation through the state parks and where they're actually working in historic environments. And so I think the mixture of background adds to our collective knowledge. So I think it is interesting to see it all written down. Any other comments from staff? Is this something we should approve then?
I
Or
think, I forget what our agenda report said, but I think it was just a discussion item.
it said receive
Okay,
report. So we have received the report and discussed it. Thank you, Fernanda, for your work on that. So let's move on to, and probably there still are no other people online or in the audience. So we'll move on to number 4. Correct?
were there no people on the?
There are no attendees online.
Okay, thanks. So agenda item number 4 is receive presentation and discuss Monterey City Code Section 38 through 74B, land use regulations for property without historic zoning, not a project under CEQA per Article 20, Section 15.378, and under General Rule, Article 5, Section 15.061, no written report, verbal presentation only.
Oh, Erica, can you pass out the? I printed out the slides for you so that you
Oh,
can
thank
have
you.
them in front of you. But
Thank you.
sorry about Juan and Lori.
Thank you.
You'll just have to follow along with the PowerPoint.
Yeah, well, it is on PowerPoint and that helps quite a bit.
Mhm.
Can we, I would consider something like this a training. Can this be counted in our training for next year?
Sure.
I think, so you know who's present today and that gives everybody a line item on training next year. I think this is a good training.
Okay.
So, thank you, Fernanda.
Okay. So this discussion topic just focuses on land use regulations for potentially historic properties, so properties without historic zoning. And this was copied, but also it was lengthy in the code, so I've summarized it, but it's all in the code, section 3874B. So what are potentially historic properties? They are properties identified in a reconnaissance survey or intensive survey, or which are determined to potentially meet the criteria for historic zoning by the community development director. And so the difference is that potentially historic properties do not have the historic zoning, so the H1 or H2.
And do we have a community development director?
Yes,
Right.
Kimberly
Okay,
Cole is
that is
sitting in the
required.
audience.
That's
Okay,
right.
I just wanted to be sure.
Sure.
Community development director. Thanks.
So the process required for alterations to potentially historic properties is that the director determines whether the alteration conforms to the Secretary of Interior standards for treatment of historic properties. So that's the first step. So the director has the authority to decide whether the alteration conforms or not. And the director also delegates this responsibility to the staff. So that any of the planners has the training, we all have the training to make the determination. So if the alteration does conform to the standards, then the permit follows the regular planning permit review process. If staff finds that the alteration does not conform to the secretary standards, then that's when the HPC gets involved. Oh, sure.
Elaborate a little bit.
Yes.
Is this on? Can you hear me? So what we've been doing is as projects are submitted, so all exterior alterations, most of them come across the planning office desk. We have a historian prepare a Secretary of Interior Standards consistency determination, and that's submitted as part of the project and helps in the evaluation on whether or not the project conforms to the Secretary of Interior standards. So typically projects going to the Architectural Review Committee also have a formal determination by a historian.
Right, so even though it's not written in the code, that we do still ask for that report by the historian. So this is what happens when there's a property, when the alteration does not conform to the standards. The property is on the reconnaissance survey list, but we require an intensive survey, which is the next step. It's the more involved survey that looks deeply into the historic structure and determines if it's eligible for historic zoning. And so that's when the historian will go through the 4 criteria for historic zoning. And we'll also look at the building's integrity. And if it is eligible for historic zoning, according to the intensive survey, we would add the property to the adopted survey list and present it to the HPC. So that's when the HPC will weigh in on alterations that do not conform to the standards. If the intensive,
Could
Go
you
ahead.
give us an example of a property that would, maybe one that we've seen and why, for the first part where it goes right to ARC, and then a typical one that would go to HPC, so we have an example.
Okay,
Thanks.
so, if the property conforms to the Secretary of Interior standards, it goes to ARC, or it goes to either a staff level architectural review approval or architectural review committee approval. If it does not conform to the standards and the intensive survey finds that it's not eligible for historic zoning, then it also would go to architectural review committee or staff level.
And maybe just to put like a visual picture, and we could bring some photographs if that'd be helpful at a future date. Most of our homes in Monterey are over 50 years old. I mean, you look at our neighborhoods, they're over 50 years old. If it's a lot of those properties are on the reconnaissance survey list, it can be in the hundreds for a particular neighborhood, but they may not be designated. So the applicant, maybe they're doing an addition to the property. Or, I mean, I think that's the most common. We're adding a bedroom on, we're adding something onto this property. So they submit their application. It's a non-designated property. It's on a reconnaissance survey list. We have, with their application, a historian evaluate the proposed addition for consistency with the Secretary's standards. If the project is consistent with the Secretary's standards, then the project goes to the Architectural Review Committee for design review. And they're predominantly looking at the size and the shape and the compatibility of the proposed addition. If the project was on a reconnaissance survey list and was not consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards, and most people will work with us to get to consistency. Most of them don't want to come in front of two boards. I'll just be honest. I haven't worked with one applicant yet that wants to come to the Historic Preservation Commission, go through this review, and then go to the Architectural Review Committee. So most of them, if we look at things and we say, you know, this appears to be inconsistent, let's look at what the historian says. They'll give us their opinion, and then they'll even do design changes to their project to make it consistent. So there's a lot of, I mean, you could look at almost every project that goes in front of the Architectural Review Committee, and I'm pretty sure most of those buildings are over 50 years old. Probably a great number of them are probably eligible for some sort of, potentially eligible for some historic zoning.
And you might note that over 50 years old is not a city designation.
Correct.
That comes to us. We are an older city
Mhm.
than some, so for us to have a property, you know, we would have hundreds of properties over thousands, maybe.
A question. So a property that is that you're not asking the qualified professional to decide whether the property is historic or not the historic, but if the project is compatible with the Secretary of Interior standards. Is that correct?
Almost, and maybe I just phrase it slightly differently, but it's about that. So as we work with applicants and they have an older home, we say, if you design your project consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards, and we get a report that, you know, confirms that, and we agree with that, then your project goes to the Architectural Review Committee. And there's no formal determination on whether or not your building is eligible. We're not going to go to that second page of the DPR form. You know, there's 2 pages. The first page is a brief property description, and the second page is significance. So that's the difference between, we have reconnaissance level surveys, which are drive-by surveys of most of our neighborhoods, saying these buildings are potentially historic and need to be, more research needs to be done before an intensive survey. And that's the second piece. So we never get to that if the project is designed consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards. And that was crafted in 1999 to 2000. I think Carol may remember this. There, as the public was debating our historic preservation ordinance, which was very controversial at the time. I know we had full council chambers with angry people and people were very clear that they did not want to have their property designated or a formal determination made or have to go through more process if their project complied with the guidelines. They saw that as a penalty. And ultimately, the city council and well, I don't remember, maybe I forget who came up with it. It might have been Robert Chattel at the time, was part of representing a lot of the property owners, came up with this bifurcated process. So if it's consistent with the secretary's standards, you can go to the architectural review committee. If it's not, then you've got to submit a full survey. We're going to determine whether or not it's affordable, actually historic. And if it's not eligible, you can go through your regular planning process. If it is eligible, then this commission can comment on the design of the structure.
It is an interesting process that kind of works with the public and the staff in terms of time and interest in following through. So if a project comes in the first example, and if the staff determines that the addition or what they intend to do does conform, and years go by, you know, and a new owner or the people will look at it differently, can they come back on that and say, we would like to be considered at this time for Mills Act or for
Mhm. They
something
can.
else? It leaves the door open.
It does leave the door open. I mean, we did have a case in front of the Historic Preservation Commission where I think at least some of the commissioners disagreed with the SOI standard that had been made through the ARC hearing. I think it was on Lane Street. You guys will probably remember that. There was a single family house and attached to it or through a breezeway, a new garage was proposed, I think with an accessory dwelling unit above it or some sort of living space above it. And we had a determination by a historian. There was some differentiation in the materials between the original and the new. And they had documented what they saw as the change and that it was consistent. You know, additions aren't supposed to match the historic resource. You're supposed to have some differentiation so you can see how the building evolved over time. And the property owner purposefully didn't want to come to the Historic Preservation Commission first. They saw that as too much, that they wanted to go to the Architecture Review Committee. We had the consistency determination and the ARC approved the project. They then said, okay, now that we know we can do what we want to do, they came back to the Historic Preservation Commission and said, now we want to designate and we would like a Mills Act contract. And I remember at least one commissioner thought that the material differentiation wasn't enough. I don't know how many more people felt that way, but I remember it being a point of discussion. So we do have property owners that sometimes in year one will go through the architectural review process. And then in year 2 or 3, come back and say, okay, we're comfortable enough now. We're willing to designate our property. So
I think that for me, it helps me to understand it a little more because we are, you know, we're the public needs to participate in this and feel like it's helpful to them also. And I think all of us know people that have properties that are potentially Mills Act or historic, but it hasn't come up and they don't want it to. They just as soon
be left alone.
have a quiet
Mhm.
property and not be involved in the process. And that's allowable. That legally is allowable. You can't force somebody to bring their property up. And I think that's part of the understanding. We can't go over their wishes to say, but we think your property should be. And actually we don't have to, because if the property owner for their addition or change follows the standards, then it doesn't disturb the historic nature of that property. And it could come up at any time. It isn't as though it's being torn down. It's just being set aside for now. And they can come later and say, we do want to acknowledge this is a historic property and we want to consider Millsack, then it's a whole new project in the city's eyes, and we attach staff and we go through the process that we're involved in. Am I saying it correctly?
So that's how the process is set up, exactly as you described it. That probably all works really well as long as the HPC thinks we're making good consistency determinations. But that's exactly how the process was set up and it's codified in our code.
Yeah, some of us
Okay.
weren't there when it was set up, so I think it's good to review this in our own minds and consider it, we're trying to figure out sometimes our role in it, just as the ARC is. And every once in a while, we have a property where things are a little more unusual.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons it came up recently. Do we want to talk about that?
We
Now,
can't talk about a specific property without it being on an agenda, but I think we can talk conceptually.
Can I?
I saw that Commissioner Humbaro's hand has been
Okay.
up for a while.
That's good. I can't even see her on my,
Here I
Yeah.
am.
yeah.
Okay. All right. My question is, what if a property is more than 50 years old, or at the time of the reconnaissance survey was more than 50 years old, but was not put on the reconnaissance survey for whatever reason? Because I mean, they did miss some properties, okay? And let's just say a person wanted to get historic designation for whatever reason. Is that possible, even if they're not on the reconnaissance list?
So at any time, new information can be submitted. And sometimes we learn things about neighborhoods over time, right? And so they may say, oh, by the way, it was the drive-by survey was done, but the historian missed this major concept that came evident later. And we have had, I'm trying to remember a property that was like that. Like we didn't know about it and then they came in and designated. I can't really think of one recently. The one that I really remember, and this sort of dates, we don't have a reconnaissance survey in this neighborhood, but it was everyone's very familiar with Liz Murray's house on Ave Maria. Amazing, Charles Rollo Peters. I remember it initially, before our ordinance even, it came in for a remodel, and it didn't, at the time, if you didn't look that historic, there was, sort of, it was an old farmhouse at the time. And I remember Kent Seavey coming up to me and he said, this is a very important property. You need to understand what the history of this property is. So we hopefully, through the reconnaissance level work we've now done, sort of since that experience, we have a lot more of those properties identified. But new information comes forward.
Okay, that answers my question. So if someone wanted to propose, even if they're not on the survey, they're still allowed to propose.
They can, and we would need an intensive survey to
Right.
verify that it
Right.
complies.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I just to have, I think, maybe a comment on, the way the ordinance is, if I understand it, it allows properties who may or may not be eligible to be, historic, but we still want to keep the look of them. So their addition would, be compatible with the neighborhood, and that's where ARC blesses it or doesn't
Yeah.
bless it. So I
A lot of applicants choose that process versus going forward and deciding if it's formally eligible.
and I think that's in the spirit to keep our neighborhoods looking like they do.
The other thing I just want to bring to attention, so we have the groups of people that, are scared of designation, don't want additional regulation, don't want additional red tape. That's sort of, one group. We're also starting to see at least a couple, some people are figuring out the Historic Preservation Mills Act benefits, and it's almost on a development basis. They're buying a house. They will come and they will get it designated, get the Mills Act, complete the renovations, and then they resell it with the lower tax value. because it's transferable to future property owners. So we're also seeing, I don't want to call it speculation, but there's that side of the market that's also happening on a limited basis.
Well, some people are, I would use the word canny, or they're looking for market value and ways
Mhm.
to enhance the value of their property, which is natural for people to do if they choose to do that. So we have a balance of people that want to just not have any interference in their property, and they like it the way it is. They've had the property for a long time. Years are moving along, and they like it that way. And we don't have to disturb them. We don't have a right to disturb them. And we have people that, a balance of people that want to do more. Do you have any question that would be in general, a general question, but
So
that
just,
help you understand?
the reason that this came up, and I won't name the name of the house, but it was a house that's almost 100 years old, and it by a prominent builder, and hadn't been touched in 100 years, and they've got story poles up, and these story poles show um, what looks like significant changes to the exterior of the building. And I mean, I have to say that there haven't been any plans submitted, but that scares me. And I think that something like that, and it's listed in the neighborhood reconnaissance survey as a contributing member of the historic fabric of the community. And so I think something like that should come to HPC. That was
So the
the quote.
property you're referring to is actually on the reconnaissance survey list for that neighborhood. So it's
Right.
very similar to the reconnaissance surveys. And um, just so you know, plans have been submitted for that project, and it's getting ready to go to the architectural review committee. So if you have interests as private citizens, you're welcome to come in and look at the plans and attend the ARC hearing.
Well, something I would propose as a compromise is maybe to have on something like this, which is particularly potentially historic. I would suggest that possibly we could do a joint meeting with ARC. That might be a good compromise, and in that way, the property owner isn't having to pay for two commission visits and isn't having to spend all the extra time.
So we would actually have to change our municipal code. And in fact, in 1998 to 2000, we were holding joint meetings of both groups. So there were 15 decision makers in a room, and the HPC would go first, and then the ARC would go. Sometimes you agreed, sometimes you didn't. It was, and this was particularly happening in the Cannery Row area, if I remember, and people were up in arms about it. So I think there's not a way right now in a codified way to bring that project in front of the Historic Preservation Commission. In the future, I mean, we could, and I'm not sure I'm a fan of this, but we talked about this, combining the commissions into one. But I'm not sure we would ever support 15 people on a board. We would probably be looking to get down to 7 people, and that, Historic Preservation Architectural Review Committee would have responsibility, and the ARC meets twice a month, the HPC meets once a month. We probably would have at least 2 meetings a month. And so there's a possible organizational framework to get to what you want. There's also been a lot of opposition in the past of combining those two groups. They liked their autonomy, and they do look at things sometimes differently. So I don't know. I think Carol probably remembers all these discussions.
I remember the meetings. There were a lot of people.
And I'm not sure what we do today is perfect, but it's also, we haven't had that many complaints we adopted that ordinance in 2000. We won the state of California Governor's Award on our ordinance. It was one of the first in the state that established a design review process that included historic preservation as part of their architectural review. It's 22 years later. You know, there's probably a handful of concerned properties. And the one you're mentioning has probably been the one I've been hearing most about. So I just want to put that out there as far as there are ways to amend our code and recreate ourselves if we want.
So let me just, in the spirit of this, and I don't know what property you're talking about, it seems that they still have to conform to the Secretary of Interior standards.
And we have a report that says they do.
Okay. So they can't put up, it still has to be differentiated, I'm guessing. Though it sounds, if the story poles are
Well, I don't know. I
egregiously
mean, but
tall.
what about another compromise would be to invite maybe two people from HPT to sit with ARC and just to have a seat at the table, so you don't, so you don't have, an additional 7 people there, but you have HPC representation.
I have a question about what I'm wondering, is the fear that the addition might not conform to the standards? Is that the neighborhood's concern possibly?
Well, if you look at the story polls, there's no way it can, but
So the story poles may have been part of the problem. I think the story poles may have been put up prematurely before the plan was complete and understood. Is that possible?
So they did put the story, I don't want to talk
No, we
specifically
can't
about
talk
a project,
I
but
think it's,
I'll just say, when you go to the Architectural Review Committee, their standard submittal requirement is, so it's usually after we've done our plan check, we say, okay, put your story poles up. Well, some people put them up early.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to get it, they're trying to be diligent and maybe don't quite understand the sequencing that we're looking for.
That's what so you can't always build rules for an exception to what's normal. I mean, that could be an exception to the normal routine. And maybe it's just a good reason for property owners to be cautioned not to put their story poles up until the plan has been completely,
Yeah, I'm not
approved.
sure, and it would have made that big a difference in this
No.
scenario, but
or maybe
I mean, I think the information is what the information is, but I guess my point is if this is something that the HPC feels strongly about, it ultimately needs to be codified in a different way in the municipal code. And, do we create 2 ex officio members of the Architectural Review Committee that are HPC members and attend? Then you'd be attending 3 meetings a month. I'll just say there's organizational just implications on how that comes to be. If you're interested in speaking on that project, I will say you can speak as individuals.
That's what I was.
And so I think that's the opportunity for that to occur. And then if you want, I know we're going to be potentially talking about a couple other things that you might like to see for changes to the ordinance, possibly with submittal requirements, et cetera. But a lot of those things need to be codified, adopted through procedures, and officially changed.
well, I noticed on the report, I guess I've been on this commission for a few years now. I think it says perhaps 2015 or 16. So this is the first time it's come up. So my thinking is, for the most part, it works very well. And sometimes something comes up that's a little bit unique and
Mhm.
is drawing attention. But if we look at the projects over time, most of them are falling into the pattern that has the code to support it.
Yeah.
So I think we should get some credit for the fact how well this process is working for the most part since it was conceived. And it helps me to understand that the interior, the Secretary of the Interior standards are being applied to the addition that is being made, whether it's in the property that, you know, prompted some of the discussion, or really any property that has not been designated historic, but is potentially possibly historic.
Yeah. Pre-2000, we didn't even look at the issue of potential. We just had H1, H2 review that came here, and the ARC didn't even look at eligibility or potential or SOI consistency. So that was an achievement of the 2000 ordinance. But you know, it's always up for discussion.
Well, I think it helps us understand it because, you know, over time, sometimes we think we understand everything, and it helps to have clarification. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
You know, I think I have one more point because this is interesting too. Another major feature of the original or the 2000 ordinance is the city council said there's some buildings we want to designate without owner consent. So the council at the time said, we're going to give enough autonomy so you don't have to come to the HPC if you're potential, but there needs to be, you know, some consideration, and we're not going to designate your property without your consent. So for H1 and H2 properties, our ordinance actually says the city cannot initiate historic zoning without owner consent. And there's one exception. If you're eligible for the National Register, and then on top of that, the first, last, only, or rare of its type, then the city can initiate designation. And we've done that on 2 properties. The Wing Chong Market, Kalisa's. Those are the 2 that I remember. And that was, you know, that was the primary focus of that ordinance in 2000, was how at risk Cannery Row was, and especially those 2 buildings that were fictionalized in John Steinbeck's Cannery Row would be preserved. And those owners didn't want them preserved at all. And the city council, we came right after adoption of the ordinance and we designated without owner consent those 2 buildings. So we can designate without owner consent, National Register eligible, first, last, only, or rare of its type. So
I've just got one quick question. Is there any, does staff have any veto over the qualified professional?
like who the
Preparing.
person is
Hmm.
or their analysis.
Yeah, I mean, if you get something that's just, years ago, somebody on, I think Franklin, and it was a beautiful property, it was prairie style, which
Hmm.
actually was kind of weird for here. But they had gotten somebody from maybe Nevada to come and, you know, stamp the proper forms, and we did vote it down, and it was a beautiful property, but they had changed it so much. So what I'm wondering is, if it's egregious, can staff do anything? If it's a qualified professional?
So we're struggling in this area, just to be completely frank, because if somebody's qualified and is listed on the state of
Right.
California list as a qualified professional, they'll also, and they obviously have the academic training and distinction to make those decisions. It's hard as a staff member to say, you're wrong. One of the things we've played with, and I have mixed feelings about this, is, you know, we could require the applicant to put a deposit with the city, and then we have on-call consultants. The challenge with our on-call consultants, as you can imagine, government contracting, we have to have higher insurance requirements. And for example, we recently got a cost estimate for somebody to look at a DPR preparation. And the 2 or 3 firms were all between $8,000 and $12,000 for the DPR. And in contrast, some local historians that are not willing to get insurance. They're sort of past that period and where they want to do that. They don't want to really work for a government agency. I think people can get it between $2,000 and $3,000 and go through the process. Would it be much more objective if, we were in charge of the contract? I don't think there'd be any question then, and then, but there's also just the amount of money and I don't have the staff resources really for somebody to manage all those contracts, because we would have to manage them and do scopes of work. And so I've been reticent. It also comes up with tree reports, just so you know, in front of, and not currently with the Architectural Review Committee, but in the past, somebody said, this person prepared a tree report. We don't think it's that objective. We think more of the trees are healthy, or I don't care what the argument is, healthy or unhealthy. And we want the city to hire a separate consultant. And then you get competing tree reports. And I haven't concluded yet that the quality of work is negative enough to cause that organizational change and the cost increase, but we could do that.
Well, I think it helps to understand the pressures that are considered with all of these possible changes, and that you might solve one problem, but could have unanticipated, unanticipated problems in the future because of those changes. And almost every type of coding or process has some gray areas and some, once in a while there's a problem, and sometimes you have to live with some of it. And I just happened to stay in a historic building, and in the room they had the story of a particular house in the city of Joaquin. I guess there's the city of Joaquin as well as the San Joaquin area or valley. And people that owned a house and lived in it, a family, parents, children, they lived in this house, and they decided at the end of their lives they wanted it torn down. They didn't want anyone else to live there. And it was the most historic house in the city. Wow. And they chose to have it just obliterated. There are pictures of it. There's a book about it. And I think it's and they ended up not having descendants, the people in the immediate family, parents and children, and they just thought it was their house and didn't want anyone else to live in it. And I'm thinking, we haven't had one of those here where somebody wants to. Usually somebody has an interest in
Wow.
the property, but
if it was a bordello, the city of Monterey would have stepped in.
I'm bringing a little humor, but it made me think about how did the city let that property just be bulldozed? It's a fantastic structure. They could have, and it was in perfect condition, and they could have had a museum or historic meetings there, all kinds of things, a good use of a resource. But they didn't have a way to say they couldn't, take out one of their own buildings. So, sometimes we can worry about some of the details and some things that don't seem to flow. But, in terms of really big issues, we're doing pretty well. And I think it helps us all to understand it. So, and I think it's good to have difference of opinion. I think it's good for people to go express their point of view to the architectural committee. I think that's what makes a city government alive and working, is to have public participation. But setting up commissions we have to have guidelines, and there has to be a process that we follow, and it helps us see it. So thank you for explaining. Are there any other questions that we have?
I do have a question.
Okay. Lori.
Is there going to ever be any updates to the reconnaissance survey now that it's pretty out of date? So more houses have become more than 50 years old, and that some houses were actually missed in the new Monterey survey, because I took a pretty deep dive into that.
So those surveys that were done with a grant. And we could pursue another grant. That's how the Alta Mesa neighborhood survey, reconnaissance survey was done, through a grant. I mean, eventually it would be ideal to update all the surveys. When a property is removed from the reconnaissance survey, we do go in and update that to reflect, the commission's decision. But
Somehow, oh, excuse
a
me.
comprehensive survey would require a lot of resources, and I think would be more doable with a grant.
Right. I just think somehow doesn't seem fair to me that some people are on this reconnaissance survey and other people who should have been on it aren't on it, which creates, an issue. Plus, at this point, our survey's rather outdated. So,
Well, I think if a community member wants their property reviewed, there's a process for that. And we've all
right.
talked about it.
Right.
And fortunately, the next part of Fernanda's report talks about demolitions. And I was thinking, why don't we go into that? Because it does kind of tie into that beautiful historic house that was
Mm-hmm.
demolished. Let's see what happens with demolitions.
Yes, so the process for potentially historic properties that are proposed for demolition is we require an intensive survey. So that's the required submittal requirement that the owner needs to provide. And that intensive survey goes through the 4 criteria for historic zoning. And if it finds that it is eligible for historic zoning, then that's when the HPC has to review the intensive survey. And the HPC may, there's a process for delaying demolition of the building. I didn't put that in here. We haven't really gone that route. But what happens more often is the intensive survey says that the building is not eligible for historic zoning. And our code says when it's found not to be eligible, it should be removed from the adopted survey list. And the HPC, that's when it comes to the HPC. Because when anything is removed from a reconnaissance or adopted survey list, it requires HPC review. And if you find that it is not eligible, so if you agree with the intensive survey, that's when the property is removed. If you do not agree, that's when some applicants have appealed your denial to the planning commission, and sometimes they do get their properties removed on appeal.
Mhm. So in terms of these 3 different scenarios, the most the one we can't go back and change is if somebody's demolished it, but we do get to have some input in that. It does go to HPC.
Mhm.
And the other one that goes straight to ARC, they have to conform to the regulations in their alteration of the project. So it keeps that project in good condition, and later on it could go to HPC if the new property owner chooses to. And often that happens when a property changes hands and somebody buys a new property, and the property taxes, the property value is high, the taxes are therefore high, and they find out that they can apply some of the property tax money to maintaining older property. They get more interested in it. So there's potential that those properties will come back at some time and be reviewed and be considered by HPC if the new property owners want them to. be. So there, it seems like this helps us understand that even if one decision doesn't seem, we don't seem to be involved in, perhaps down the line, the property is still kept in good condition and could come back. Am I saying that
Ex-
all right?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts about this that you have any, and is this a good, are you through with your report?
I am. The recommendation was just to receive the presentation and discuss, which we've done.
Yeah.
So,
Carol,
This brings up another topic, demolition by neglect, which is a prickly project, but if we could have a presentation on that, at some time in the future, that would be a good thing, because you hear about people, developers buying up property and it's got a historic house on it, and they don't want the historic house there, and they just, leave it alone, and it goes away. And I think, maybe we've lost some historic resources because of this. So, but it's a very complex topic.
Commissioner Dawson, I fully support your comment. I think there's no consequence to somebody doing that, and I think the community and the city lose when developers just do that. Either purposefully, which I don't, giving people the benefit of the doubt, probably not. But even if it's just by neglect, it's a real problem. And the short time that I've been on commission, I've been a little frustrated because I've seen that happen at least in a couple of properties, that there's really no recourse to remedy. So I support that too.
And just to follow up on that, our code is currently silent on the issue of demolition by neglect. There's no current standard or process or program. I think the county now has one after, I have to go and look at their code, but I think Monterey County did that after, I don't know, I'm not positive. We would have to research what other cities have demolition by neglect clauses now, but our code does not include that.
Could it? I mean, is it? I mean, I'm sorry if I'm going beyond the agenda, but is that something that we can request a referral, or maybe the department to take a look at it, or does the county code have any applicability within the city limits?
No, we would have to adopt our own demolition by neglect section to our ordinance, but you can request to agendize it or to have staff research at least what the county has done, and I could bring back a report.
That'd be great.
I think at least two and possibly more commissioners would appreciate that. I'm seeing heads shake, so I think there's a consensus that would be good additional information. So I think it's a good idea. And one, really, we just go from that presentation right into commissioner comments anyway. So you're right on the agenda. Don't feel bad about that. It's an appropriate thing to have it. And are there any other commissioner comments at this time? Thank you, Fernanda. I think that was very interesting. I think we all felt we gained some understanding from it, and I appreciate having Kim come too, and with her long experience, she added more depth to it. So do we have any more commissioner comments? Sometimes people talk about historic things of interest too. Did anybody have something they want to talk about?
I have something.
Okay.
So I know that, part of a building fell down in Monterey, the 498 Alvarado Street, the Pacific Valley Bank building. And, I have heard suggestions, and I agree that, I would encourage the city to look at maybe somehow preserving some of the adobe so it's visible to the public and interpreting that. I know there's a plaque on the one side, but I've walked by that building a million times and didn't realize it was an adobe building. So I think that would be really good for the community. Yeah. And even if it's just like a window, where it shows the adobe, that would be good.
Okay, like, I mean, I'm not sure if exposing the adobe is feasible, but you mean like a image or? at least
I
a
think-
photo of what
I
it looks
Where
like.
they put glass over.
Oh,
where
glass.
You can see the actual adobe behind whatever the wall is today.
I can ask, because I'm working with the historian that's preparing the so the building did have a historic report, a historic preservation report, but it's from the 1990s. So he's updating it and adding provisions for um reinforcing the structure. So I can ask him if we can have like a framed part of the adobe.
A lot of, San Carlos has done that inside where they have
Right.
the old adobe, and I've seen it in a million places in other historic where
It-
they've been a cutout in a wall or in a floor, or, as a
Mhm.
matter of fact, we do it at the lighthouse in a floor.
And the question is, on that wall, um, it couldn't affect the adobe because adobe needs protection and always was whitewashed and protected anyway. So just having it available, and then if the weather got in there, how would that affect it? But if there's some
Well,
way,
They
to
usually
protect
do it with
it.
glass or plexiglass.
There's something over it,
the
yeah.
ones in the
that's what I
church,
meant.
of course, are protected, but there
Yeah.
could be some,
Well, I've
they could
seen whole
explore it.
Floors
Mhm.
in Europe that have been done where you look down and see.
And I would like to speak for that group. This is, this last year, they participated in Christmas in the Adobes, and I think they're interested in celebrating the history of the building. And this could be an opportunity for them to do that by showing that and having a little more information. It was amazing when it came down, and then one day they didn't have the tarp on it, and that whole wall was adobe, and that was something to see. So even a photograph showing that whole wall would help people see what's underneath some of the protected walls of our city.
I think in Casa Munras, there's an adobe section of the original wall. And I don't know if they've
I've
blasted
been in
in.
there.
Um,
It's very hard to find it. They'll show it to you, but with the last renovation, there's a tiny bit
Yeah.
and it's on the inside.
Yeah, it is on the inside.
And San Carlos Cathedral.
Yes, they
they got-
mentioned
yeah,
that
they
on the inside again.
Right.
It's how to do it
Yeah.
on the outside. They'd have to have somebody.
It's been done
care.
a million times.
Hmm.
Sure they can figure it out.
Any other historic activities?
I have a couple. The Monterey Museum of Art through the end of April is doing Monterey Collects California. They've done a lot of publicity, but since we're mentioning the library events, I think we should mention MMAs. And in Carmel, open to the public, the Carmel Residents Association did a wonderful presentation the end of last month that I attended. Experience Monterey Bay through the eyes of early California artists. And it's based on a book that the two presenters who presented the event, Preserving Nature, a Field Guide to the Art and Artists of the Monterey Bay. That one's done, but February 22nd, open to the public again. The book Humbled, How California's Monterey Bay Escaped Industrial Ruin. Humbled is the name of the book by authors Glenn Church and Catherine McKenzie. So that will be at the Carmel Women's Club, February 22nd at 6:30 for wine, 7 o'clock is the program.
I'd like to congratulate Monterey History and Art for having a kind of a grand reopening of the Stanton Center. And they are returning to focus on the history of Monterey artists, and the community is supporting it. Everybody feels really good about that. So that's a big step for them, and they've been working on grants and working with the city as well, and working with local artists as well as historians to create a museum that tells the story of Monterey. So that's a big step,
That is
and
a
we
big step.
congratulate them for
Will the
that.
Dolly exhibit then totally be gone?
Well, maybe little by little,
Little by little,
because
okay.
that was interesting and it helped out for a while, but but now they're moving toward Monterey history and the Dolly had a connection, a big, Dolly had a big dinner at the Naval Postgraduate School in the Hotel Del Monte. And so he was here. It's not,
Yeah.
and we had that big event at that time. And so it's been interesting. It was an interesting part of the process, but going back to Monterey history, it is a move that people are feeling very positive about.
A lot of people are really happy about that too.
Any other comments? Are we?
I had a phone conversation with Chair Smith Crivello about the Hellam House and that it was for sale. It's been purchased and I've already talked to the owner and he's interested in a millsack contract. So
Oh,
you
that's
might
really
be,
great.
yeah, you might be seeing that in the near future.
Yes,
Just
that's
the
the
Hellam.
original Hellam on Scott, kind of in back of the First Theater. As you go up there, that property has just been like left in time. It looks like it could have been
That's a good way to
1880s,
put it.
with the land around it and the barns and what I heard was two couples bought it and they also have a business where they have building supplies and they want to make it a place they can come and spend time and to make it more habitable on the inside, but leave it more natural on the outside.
Mhm.
So to hear that they want Millsack is very exciting because it really talks about Monterey history. So that's really good news. Thank you for
Well, they
that.
spent 1,000,004 on it, so
Oh,
Yeah, well, it's a lot of land.
it
That's a
is.
good deal,
Prime
actually.
land, prime land, yeah.
It's really,
Monterey.
yeah, that's really, any other
No.
staff? Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the training and the information. Meeting closed.
I look forward to seeing you all in person next month.